He's just setting up. He's setting them all up. Your priests and mine. And you, by extension. God help you if you've got a little extreme homeschool out in the country somewhere. Who knows what domestic terrorist plots you might be hatching when even the Pope is very concerned about you and your priests being mentally imbalanced. Do you see where this is going? This is not about liturgy anymore, friends. This is about a political war against the church, against faithful Catholics in the church. That's what's happening here. Hello, clans of the sane and godly remnant of Christian believers all around the world. Welcome to the Remnant Underground. I am Michael Matt. Before we get started tonight, make sure you like and subscribe. Is that right, Walter? That's what we're doing? Like and subscribe regardless of where you're watching us, which platform, because where are we now? We're at remnant-tv.com. I guess we're still over at Rumble to some extent. We got a little Twitter action going. X, Twitter, Facebook now, of course, YouTube. Later on in the show, in fact, I want to do a follow-up on the comment that I did on the Mel Gibson, Joe Rogan interview. We did a short social media commentary on that last week, which just took off, over 250,000 views in a couple of days, in fact. And some of you had questions about that, questions about this thing called sedevacantism, question about the Siri theory. And I want to try to, I know there's so many people who are new to this movement, new to this program. And I think there really was just a lot of really legitimate ignorance about what we were talking about. And again, if you want to follow us on that, we got a new format. We're going to be doing more hard-hitting, short commentary when a story like that is hot. So you got to make sure you're following me on X if you want to follow that. Because people are saying, you know what, I want to wait around to the weekend to hear what you think about something that happened days ago. So we've heard you on that. And I'm interested, too, in having some sort of format whereby we can respond right away. So we're going to be doing that mostly on social media and mostly on X. So make sure you follow me on X. There's a link right down here to do that. So, but that's what I want to comment towards the end of the show. Before we get to that tonight, I guess we have to take a look at Francis's new book. How many books does this man need?
Oh, many, very many.
The Pope of Humility, the Pope of Mercy, just can't quite get enough of himself, can he?
Does he have as many memoirs as Obama yet?
I don't think quite yet. But it's interesting you should say that, because let's face it, Obama's job was to tear the United States of America down and trash it, right? Francis's job is to tear the old medieval, Eurocentric, white Christian Catholicism thing down and replace it. They really are very similar revolutionaries. I mean, people need to realize that. He's not making mistakes, Francis, when he does this, all the stuff that he's doing. It's part of his job description. He's genuine about this. He truly believes the old medieval Christendom, Eurocentric white Christianity is a threat to the New World Order, and he's dismantling it. So we need to be just honest about that. That's what he is. He's been telling us that's what he's been doing, what he plans to do from the second he got in. And everything he's doing, even in his old age, is all about that, including this new book, which I guess he imagines we're all eager to read. Sometimes I think the only people that read the Francis drivel, and I mean that with all sincerity, it's drivel, it's garbage, it needs proofreaders, it's really bad. But people say, he's the Holy Father. I don't think for 1 second, what is he now, 87? 88? I don't think for 1 second he's writing any of this nonsense. This is just the Francis team, the brand, hard at work. So they gave us another one now. This new book, it's called Hope, the Autobiography. And for more on that, I couldn't stomach it. My friend Robert Morrison actually apparently went through it, and he reviewed it for the Remnant. Walter can throw a little bit of that up on the screen. Thank you, Robert, for sparing us the indignity of having to slog through that. I would encourage our readers to go ahead and read Robert's excellent review of it. The book itself is billed as a reflection on the Pope's youth. But once again, friends, and I'm not making it up. I mean, I thumbed through enough of it to see this, that the main takeaway so far in the news, in the book so far, the takeaway is Francis's bizarre war on us. War on traditionalists. That is like, my gosh, that is just, he's fixated. He's obsessed with us still, right? He goes back to the rigid backwardism of tradition. Now just think about that. Who's constantly on the warpath against their own people? This is so rude, isn't it? It's so boorish. It's the behavior of a rube. If you got a problem with your own people, deal with it behind closed doors. Nobody cares, Francis. Nobody really wants to slog through your little hate affair with your own children. It's embarrassing. Absolutely obsessed with us. And I'm telling you, this is one of the most encouraging things from our point of view. As ridiculous as it is, it really is encouraging to see an old hippie revolutionary like that obsessed with us. And why is he obsessed with us? If we were not in his grill, he would not be obsessed with us. He's worried our children are going to grow up and undo his entire Woodstock generation thing that nobody cares about if you're under 80 years of age. You don't care. And he's beginning to realize that. And I think he's very afraid. He's very afraid that he's become completely passé in his old age. And I think he actually has, Now, I can't imagine, when he talks about us being backwards, friends, I'm no young man anymore. But even I can't imagine anything more backward than Francis's felt, bannered, tie-dyed, guitar strumming, glory days, the memory of which now seems to dominate this angry old hippie's every waking moment. But he's worried about us. He's the one that's sitting there like Hamlet, just being driven crazy by the memory of something that never quite came to fruition in his life. It's all falling apart, and he's just going after us constantly, okay? And I think it's important to make this observation, because at the end of the show, we're going to talk about this Gibson-Rogan comment. He doesn't seem worried about sedevacantism at all. He's not worried that we might end up thinking he's not the Pope or make this declaration he's not the Pope. He's worried about traditional Catholics at the heart and bosom of the church. Now, why do you suppose that is? We're going to get to that, because I think that's very telling. He doesn't care about a lot of things, but he cares about traditionalists inside the church who are resisting. More on that in a minute. So the Vatican tells us again that this book, this exceptional book, was supposed to appear only after the good pontiff's passing, you see. But due to the needs of and I'm quoting, the needs of our times, Francis was moved to make this, quote, precious legacy available right now. Here's the book. He's going to make it available to us right now. So, thank Pachamama for that, for the little things. Well, what Francis is doing, I think, is illegal, but everybody's afraid to call that out or thinks it just will never happen, so we can't even think like that. But think about it. What he's actually doing, friends, if anybody else were to do it, if a politician would do it, it would be the end of his career and he would be up on hate speech charges. Why? Why? It's because Francis is now spending much of his time attacking faithful religious people, Catholics, faithful Catholics, moms and dads, heads of large families, people who don't have a lot of money, they can't fight back, they can't hire lawyers, right? Homeschooled families, right? He's attacking them, and then he's attacking their priests. The consolations that they have in this life. You think about what's going on in society. I was thinking this the other day, like all these, when is it? Maybe you can tell me, you guys are younger than I am. When did singers, pop singers, all become strippers? When did this happen? I didn't realize. Somewhere along the line, I realized they're all a bunch of harlots and strippers entertaining our 10-year-olds, literally walking out there in half naked now. Like I thought it was bad when Madonna was out there. I'm looking at this stuff going, when did this happen? So this is what parents are confronting. And you're laughing at me. I know I'm an old guy, but I'm not kidding you. They really do go out there in their underwear and shake their lower spinal extremities at the 10-year-old fans. And this goes on apparently all the time, from Taylor Swift all the way to Miley and beyond, right? Okay. So this is the kind of unholy rot that parents are confronting on a daily basis. You'd think that maybe Francis would say, well, at least they've got these good and well-meaning traditional Catholic priests that are trying to lead them in purity and lead them in catechism lessons and traditional liturgies and doing good things. No. Francis looks at this rot of absolutely degenerate culture of ours. He sees some families who are okay that got young priests. What does he say? He attacks their priests. He attacks their traditional Catholic priests. That's the best this guy can do. And he attacks them. This goes back to my legal case, which I'm going to find a lawyer that's going to do this for me. He attacks them on the grounds of their religious beliefs. Would Francis go after the Amish as for their backwards, rigorous, of the past ways? Has he ever done that? Would he attack the Amish? No. Why would he not attack the Amish for being backwards and using horses instead of cars? He wouldn't, because it would be a violation of their religious freedom. You don't do that as a person of authority, of power. You don't get to do it. But he goes after his own people. He goes after Catholics whose only crime is they want to believe and worship in a certain way, a way that was established in the church for 2,000 years. He goes,
legitimate right, too.
Absolute legitimate right, given to them by a pope. So what is this? What are we looking at? It's other than an obvious violation of the First Amendment rights of traditional Catholics. So where's this enterprising young lawyer who's going to start bringing these charges against the Holy One, I wonder? Because I think it's time. This man is spiritually abusing children. He's spiritually abusing, mocking, committing calumny and slander against perfectly innocent, priests in good standing. He's just using the full weight of his authority to attack them, his authority, he's mocking them because of what they believe, because of their faith, right? The note, quote, these young guys, they wear elegant and costly clothing, tailoring, lace, fancy trimmings, rochets, whatever that is. He's dressed, and he accuses them of dressing to conceal a mental imbalance. I'm quoting, friends. Accusing them how they dress, judging people by how they dress, judging them because you know who they dress like? Well, they dress like Padre Pio, they dress like Pius XII, they dress like Monsignor O'Flaherty, right, from Scarlet and the Black. They dress exactly as priests had always dressed and still do. So he's just mocking them for the way they dress. This is the Pope. Because he says it's concealing a mental imbalance, emotional deviation, and behavioral difficulties. He's saying they're crazy, and he's basing it much on how they dress. Okay. So are these Swiss guards guilty of the same thing? Because they too dress in a sort of different, antiquated way. Is that some sign as far as Francis is concerned of a mental imbalance? Well, we don't know. Maybe he's going to change that too. But this really is serious. He should be, I think, sued for it. He should be sued, maybe brought up on charges for this. What do these young priests do? They spent 8 years in a seminary learning theology, learning Latin, learning how to say traditional Latin Mass that Pope Benedict, his immediate predecessor, said they could say. Francis comes along and just says they're all a bunch of nut jobs? And he gets away with this? And you have these ridiculous Pope-splainers out there on YouTube saying, oh yeah, man, it's about time somebody gets real about this problem. What, the problem of well-trained, well-disciplined, young traditional Catholic priests who aren't diddling the kids? That's the problem for Francis? Where does this guy get off? And let's not forget, this is the same Pope who's long been accused. Right now he's in the middle of a huge cover-up, right? Everybody's still talking about it, covering for his creepy little friends, such as Father Marco Rupnik, right? We all know about this dude. The alleged serial sexual abuser who went after a bunch of nuns in a convent. And pretty much everybody knows it's true. It's just a matter of, is the guy ever going to swing for it? Evidently not. He is, after all, a friend of the Pope's. So this attack on legitimate priests, again, who are not chasing the kids around, not diddling the kids around, just simply trying to lead young families in practicing their faith, this papal attack on them comes from the guy who just simply waited out the McCarrick scandal, the uber scandal, sexual scandal of the 20th century and 21st century in the Catholic Church, probably the worst scandal in the history of the church under Ted McCarrick, right? He just waited it out until the press stopped talking about it. After all, he is the Pope and doesn't need to answer any questions. Do you even remember the details of this? Well, this is what it looked like just a couple years ago.
The claim is explosive that Pope Francis covered up sexual abuse in the American church. But is it true? I won't say a single word about this, he said. The allegation is that he knew Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was abusive to adults, but did nothing for years until the Cardinal resigned last month. It's a church still reeling from Pennsylvania's grand jury report, detailing sexual abuse of children by hundreds of priests. This weekend in Ireland, the Pope begged forgiveness for similar crimes amid street protests and a church divided.
And all of this is to say nothing of the weirdos that Francis appoints to his inner circle. Francis is head, for example, of the former Holy Office, the dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith. This is the Holy Office, right? This is responsible for heretics over the past few hundred years, disciplining dissidents, enforcing sexual morality in the church. The Holy Office used to be the CDF. Now, never mind that Francis is current head of the former Holy Office, wrote a book, we all know, we all remember, he wrote a book about kissing, and here's the thing, he wrote a book about kissing and the sensations that kissing evokes. Now I'll pause for a second, let that sink in. This is a Catholic priest who wrote that. Kissing and the sensation that kissing evokes. Where's his mind, I wonder, this celibate priest? It's a priest who Francis appoints now. Think about it. Just think about the scandal, the horrific scandal. This is what I meant. His job is obviously to just dismantle the old Catholic Church, right? And to hand the whole thing over to Klaus Schwab or what's left of the WEF or whatever it is, the World Economic Forum. Okay, he appoints this guy to succeed Alfredo Cardinal Ottaviani, just giant theologians of the past, just watchdogs of the faith, you know. A little later on, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger. A little later on, Gerhard Cardinal Muller. Powerhouse theologians, right? This little clown, this guy, Cardinal Victor Emmanuel Tucho Fernandez, writes a book called Heal Me With Your Mouth, The Art of Kissing, and he gets to ascend to the second highest position in the Vatican. You think there isn't a problem in the church today? But don't get me wrong, man, this guy Tucho is not imbalanced. No, not according to Francis. No, he's just a good priest, good guy, heck of a priest, who kind of has a penchant for authoring books about kissing. What's wrong with that? And, according to Francis, the traditional priests are the ones who are mentally imbalanced, mentally handicapped. Because they want to say the same Mass that Padre Pio said all his life. That makes them nuts. They love the church's 2,000-year-old rite of Mass, so they obviously have emotional and behavioral problems that need to be kind of reined in, obviously. Okay? Now, you and I, all of us went to Rome to cover the Sex Summit a few years ago. Cardinal Supich headed that one up. But that's where the whole world got to watch the church groveling at the feet of CNN and company, apologizing for the mess, the scandal, the abused children, the abused adults, the abused seminarians that's been going on for the past 25, 30 years, quarter century, under these clowns. So we all got to see the church just being mocked and ridiculed, rightfully so, for what's happened to the priesthood. You would think Francis would have the good grace to shut the heck up about traditionalist priests and about the few priests who are actually causing growth and doing something positive and wonderful for family. You think he would just shut up, but no, he's so angry. He's so filled with hate. He can't help himself. We are his public enemy number one. People like that have these behavioral problems that Francis has called out now publicly in the press, well, we all know they should be medicated, these young priests. The Pope himself is targeting them. It must be true. So these priests should be medicated, they should be monitored, they should be incarcerated in hospitals, maybe mental hospitals, for their own safety and the safety of others. And certainly, friends, the FBI is well within its rights to be surveilling parishes and churches where such priests are offering the Latin Mass, right? We're talking, after all, about dangerous extremists, according to the Pope. You see what's happening? He's setting up for the roundup. A roundup that happened in Nazi Germany of Catholic priests, to the tune of thousands and thousands of priests sent off to Dachau. A roundup that happened in the Soviet Union. Father Walter Sisek would be an example of what that looked like. Once it was determined that these priests were dangerous priests. Now even the Pope is saying, well, these traditionalists are dangerous. He's just setting up. He's setting them all up. Your priests and mine. And you. By extension, God help you if you've got a little extreme homeschool out in the country somewhere. Who knows what domestic terrorist plots you might be hatching when even the Pope is very concerned about you and your priests being mentally imbalanced. Do you see where this is going? This is not about liturgy anymore, friends. This is about a political war against the church, against faithful Catholics in the church. That's what's happening here. And don't think for one second this is all about liturgy, because it's not, and it's a huge mistake traditionalists make. Well, I'm going to defend Ad Orientem then, and they'll see it. I'm going to defend Latin in the liturgy, and then finally the Vatican will see that it's not a matter of... And we talk liturgy, right? Well, guess what? These clowns running the Vatican, I know them well. They do not care which Mass you attend. Does that surprise you? For them, this actually isn't about the Latin Mass. They don't care. They don't care. I was in Rome for the closing of the Synod on Synodality in St. Peter's. And guess what language the entire Mass was inside the Basilica of St. Peter's? From beginning to end. Latin. Oh, it was pretty. If you didn't know anything about liturgy, you might have thought it was a Latin Mass. So that's because the press was all over Rome that day. And they pulled out all the stops, and boy, it sure looked Catholic, right? Reinforcing what I'm saying to you. They don't actually care about the Latin Mass. The problem they have here, friends, is with you. Francis wants you to disappear. Francis wants me to disappear. We are the problem. Because think about it, as I said earlier, like the Obama thing, they were tasked in the name of this equity and inclusion thing throughout the whole world. You can't have superiority, you can't have supremacy, you can't have one country that's more powerful than the other, right? So a guy like Obama, a guy like Biden, what was their job? Their job was to flatten the playing field, level the playing field, get the American supremacism taken care of, take America down. You've seen these inner cities, you've seen Kensington over in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. Well, that's not by accident. They're demoralizing our cities. They're defunding our police, right? So that at the end of the day, America is going to collapse under the weight of its own corruption, and then we'll be just like any other third world country, see? Well, the exact same thing is happening in the church, and that's Francis's job. Francis the modernist, Francis the globalist, that's his job, to get rid of people like you. Now, he has been tasked with eliminating religious supremacism. How do I know? Because we on this show and in this newspaper were attacked by the Southern Poverty Law Center a long time ago for hate. And you know what the hate was based on? The belief that Catholicism is the true religion. Okay? That's called religious supremacism. If you believe your church is the one established by Jesus Christ, outside of which there is no salvation, you are a dangerous religious supremacist. That's why the FBI is involved with this now. I think we're going to have a brief reprieve, thank God, but that's what this has been all about. The Latin Mass is the liturgical embodiment of the extra ecclesia nulla salus theology. Do you know what that means? That's a theology of Trent. That's the traditional Catholic theology, right? And Francis is the watchdog of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the largest Christian denomination in the world today. So the Mass is one thing, but what's bothering him, what's worrying them all, what's concerning them all are the people in the pews attending that Latin Mass are getting younger all the time. That's the future. And they know it. As the Novus Ordo dies, the future is tradition, the future is restoration, and you know what they call that? The future is the religious supremacism of Catholicism. So it's you, Mr. Traditional Catholic. You're the problem. It's you, Mrs. Homeschool Traditional Catholic Mom. You are a big problem. You're a frontline warrior. You're a huge problem. You represent a clear and present danger to the revolution. The revolution of the Second Vatican Council, the revolution of modernism, the liturgical revolution, whatever you want to call it. You represent the clear and present danger to that. Because that revolution was always about one thing, friends. This is where it gets truly demonic. It was always about denying the very idea of one true church founded by Jesus Christ, outside of which there is no salvation. You see what it's always been all about? So it's not really the Latin Mass per se, it's the theology that Mass defends that's the problem, and supports and holds up. That's the problem. Because for these fellas, all religions lead to God now. That's been the whole point and purpose of the ecumenical and dialogue movement from the start. All religions are fine. They're not actually trying to get anybody to convert. They don't believe in conversion, right? It's the theology of salvation that the Latin Mass represents. That's the problem. That's why Francis hates you. Because you won't go away. Because you still believe what Catholics believe for 1,000 years. 1,500, 1,800 years, 2,000 years. You believe what Catholics believed that transformed Europe into the greatest civilization the world has ever seen, based on that faith, on the faith that you have. And of course, the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, was the touchstone of that faith, right? Before the revolution came and tore it all down. So now you and your children threaten to rebuild all of that just by being you, just by believing, just by going to Mass. And this dying old revolutionary in the Vatican hates you for it. And that's why he's obsessed. That's it for the book, friends. There's a lot more, as I say. Check out remnantnewspaper.com for a lot more on this stupid new book. But that's the woke Pope in a nutshell. It's nothing particularly new there. And I think it's going to get markedly worse. What I think there's a certain panic button. Francis coming out, for example, and saying that the fake and gay, well, he didn't say that, but the fake news on the left was responsible for the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Did you see this? This was a couple of weeks ago. I mean, that's just rich. So even Francis is realizing, oh my gosh, the winds of change are blowing, and he's trying to catch up, which is fun. So I think the thing is going to get a lot worse, and we need to understand how we're going to fight back. We do have, I think, 4 years. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of good things. There's a lot of bad things to expect over the next 4 years now. But I think one of the good things is wokeism is just going to have a hard time, especially in the Catholic Church. So we intend to use this show, of course, to try to hone our positions and get them bulletproof and airtight. Like we've said so many times in the past, we are not leaving the church. We have no intention of leaving the church. They are going to leave the church long before we do. We're not electing our own pope. We are uniting the clans of opposition all over the world, and man, is it taken off. So I know there's some disagreement that goes on. I want to talk about this now with the Gibson-Rogan thing. But I always set it up like, I don't care what your position is on the famous Robert Bellarmine quote. He's a doctor of the church who said, it is licit to resist a pope who tries to destroy the church. I think Francis is trying to destroy the church. He's trying to do so in a good sense, a positive sense in his mind. That old medieval church has to be destroyed for the good of the New World Order, right? He admits that's what he wants to do. But he is trying to destroy the church, as Bellarmine said. So when you have a pope who's trying to do that, Bellarmine said, resist him. And he says, I say it is licit to resist him by not doing what he orders and by impeding the execution of his will. End quote. That's a doctor of the church. That's good enough for me. Done. You don't interpret it that way? That's fine. That's what we're going to do. And we're not going to sit around and debate it. So you don't have to agree. It's just what we do here at the Remnant. I've been doing it for a long time, basing it on the work of great traditional pioneers such as Michael Davies, Archbishop Lefebvre, my father, and so forth. So we resist Francis to his face, just as Paul resisted Peter to his face, confident. And I'm saying this for all of those of you who are new. We're not leaving the church. The church, the Catholic Church, is the answer. It is the solution. It only makes sense that the forces of hell are doing everything they can to get over the wall, to infiltrate the church, and to use the Catholic Church to establish a diabolical new world order. We're here to stop it. We're here to do everything we possibly can to fight it. That's what we're doing. We're not going to scurry off into the tall grass and find some safety little chapel for ourselves to save ourselves and let the church burn. That's not what we're going to do. Okay, there's a war on, and we're going to stay in the church and fight it as we've always done, confident that God will sort all of us out in the end and that he will save his church. Okay, we just need to do our part. We just need to keep the old faith. And over the next 4 years, especially here in the States, the war on woke Catholicism, the church of accompaniment, the synodal church, is going to really heat up. And we intend to do everything we possibly can to use the next 4 years to destroy this great facade revolution that Team Francis is trying to foist upon the entire church, okay? So, on that, as promised, let's just close out tonight's show with a brief follow-up on that Mel Gibson, Joe Rogan interview.
I actually don't adhere to a post-conciliar church. I adhere.
Can you define what that means?
Okay. There was an event that happened in the 60s. First, there was an event in the Vatican where they elected John the 23rd Pope, right, in 1958. I was 2 years old, right? He was elected, and there was a very funny thing that happened in the conclave. You know, usually there's white and black smoke that goes out of the chimneys to tell you, we have a pope, you know, habemus papam, you know. And the white smoke came out. And everybody cheered, and they went crazy. And then about a half an hour later, black smoke came out. That never in history has that happened, that the white smoke came out, and then the black smoke came out.
White smoke means we found a new pope. Black smoke means no pope. That's right.
They'd have votes, or there'd be one reason or another they'd have a round in the conclave, and black smoke would come out many times maybe. Maybe it would take 2 weeks. But never was it known that white smoke came out, then black smoke came out.
So what was the scenario?
That somebody was elected, and that maybe something else happened, and he was pushed aside and someone else was put in. So it was
power struggle.
Some kind of power struggle. And, of course, the man who came out was a man called Angelo Roncalli, and he was John the 23rd. Now, it's interesting to note that never had a pope taken the name of another pope ever before in history. But this man took the name of a known anti-pope.
Because when I watched that clip, I saw immediately what Mel Gibson was doing, which is the same thing that he's been doing for years, okay? Mel Gibson's father, his name is Hutton Gibson. You know what? I think it's important to kind of discuss the background a little bit, again, because so many people had no idea what was going on here, you know? And I wasn't trying to be personally attack Mel Gibson. I know he's got demons. I know his marital situation is all over the place and all. That's his affair. But I do want to comment on what he tried to do that day with a massive audience, millions and millions, strongest, biggest, largest, most powerful podcast on the planet. He brings up the Siri theory. He brings up sedevacantism. Anybody who's ever done any interviews like that, especially on a show like that, you don't do that by accident. There was forethought there. He did it for a reason. And that's why I think it was well within our right and our duty to comment on it, because I knew exactly what he was doing, okay? Again, Mel Gibson's father's name was Hutton Gibson. I knew him pretty well, if you can call knowing somebody over the phone conversations, knowing someone well. He used to call me all the time. He was an early pioneer of the sedevacantist movement, right? He used to telephone on a regular basis and try to convince me to join him. And I remember trying to convince him to convince his son, Mel, to do a movie on the Vendée, which I wish Mel Gibson would do. I wish at some point somebody would do that movie, that story correctly. Anyway, that's the type of conversations that we used to have, myself and Hutton Gibson, Mel Gibson's father. So that's part of the backstory to all this. When I saw Mel on Rogan, I immediately knew what was going on. And I know a lot of you didn't, because you don't go back 40 years as I do, right? That's the backstory. Mel Gibson and I, respectively, independently, go a long way back in the traditional Catholic movement, okay, a long way. And here's what I mean. The Gibson family, I can name a bunch of them. They all come back from when I was a child, because Gibson's a bit older than I am, but the Gibson family, the Patrick Henry Omler family, the Lane family, a bunch of families, very prominent traditional Catholic families. They tried to convince my father, Walter Matt, back in the early 70s to make the big move to Australia. That's why Gibson was in Australia. That's why Mad Max, when he was shooting those films, he had a little Australian accent and all that, because they had all migrated to Australia to try to do something, to kind of evade the revolution of the Second Vatican Council. They thought they had a better chance of raising their kids there in Australia than in New York or wherever they came from. They wanted to seek refuge, from the Church of Vatican II, the Revolution of Vatican II, down under. Now, my father didn't take the bait, thank God, because I didn't have to grow up in Australia. It's a godforsaken country now, I'm sorry to say. But anyway, my father knew all of these families fairly well. There was a couple of them that even wrote for the Remnant early on a lot of these questions. I remember one. Pat Omler wrote an article called On the Invalidity of the New Mass. And my father said, okay. He sends it from Australia. He was a friend of the Gibsons as well. He said, okay, well, we're going to call it Questioning the Validity of the New Mass, because we have to put this in the context of a discussion and a question. You're not going to make statements in the Remnant saying that. This is a long time. This is like 1972. So we knew these families pretty well. They eventually went sedevacantist. Now, fine, I'm not here tonight to attack them for that. But when Mel Gibson introduced the Siri theory, friends, to Joe Rogan, of all people, I mean, no disrespect to Joe Rogan, but obviously he had no idea what in thunder Gibson was talking about. So why did Gibson bring it up? Now, Mel knew exactly what he was talking about. Mel knew exactly what he was doing. He was using that massive Rogan audience to roll out a very, very old theory. A theory that was pioneered, by the way, by his father, among others, the Siri theory. Okay? Now, this is a theory whereby they held that after Pope Pius XII died in 1958, the conclave was convened, white smoke billowed out of the Sistine, and then it went black, and then it went white, and the theory began circulating all over the place that Giuseppe Cardinal Siri had actually been chosen, but he was forced by the Freemasons to turn it down. And so he made way for Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli, the future John the 23rd, anti-Pope John the 23rd, according to them, who convened the Second Vatican Council, right? Now, I don't know much about this. I do know that when I've covered 2 conclaves, and I saw the same thing happen before before Ratzinger was made Pope, where we clearly saw white smoke, and then it became black, and then it became white again. There was a mistake with a little chimney, a little fireplace up. Those guys are not, they're holy guys, but they don't know anything about starting fires, and I guess they burned the wrong material there. So we saw the black, and then we saw the white, and then we saw the white. Sometimes that just happens, right? And what always struck me as odd about this one is people say, Cardinal Siri is the true Pope, man. And I was like, wow, if that is true, he was like the worst pope in the history of the papacy. What a jerk. Cardinal Siri was supposed to be a conservative. But instead of being a conservative, he's a total wuss who continues to serve as a cardinal of the Catholic Church until his death in May of 1989. Never said a word because he was so afraid of Freemasons. This thing just never held up. I had more respect for Cardinal Siri. He was a good man. Why would he sit there and be quiet for all those years that he was the actual legitimate pope, and let all this mayhem happen in the church? Is because he was afraid of Freemasons. You see how kind of crazy it is? But anyway, that's the Siri theory. That's the theory that Gibson trots out to Joe Rogan. He says, now why would he do that? Why would he, why did that happen? Well, he's asking a loaded and leading question. So people would go investigate this, okay? He's pushing a theory. So then some of you took issue after my comment, saying that, well, just because John the 23rd, maybe wasn't really the Pope, that doesn't mean we've had no valid priests and bishops left in the world today. It doesn't mean the gates of hell have prevailed. To which I say, yes, in fact, it does, if you study the theory. It recently became that way because the math no longer adds up. So what do I mean by that? That in the years following the election of anti-Pope John the 23rd, the rites of consecration, the rites of ordination, I'm talking about Episcopal consecration, the rites of priestly ordination, and even the rite of Mass, it was all reformed, okay? But because the Pope was an anti-Pope, according to this theory, all of his new rites are also invalid for various reasons. Number one being he wasn't even the Pope, so he had no right to change them, according to the theory. So this means that since the death of Pius XII, the legitimate bishops have all died off now. That's what I mean about the math doesn't work anymore. We don't have any legitimate bishops left. Maybe 1 or 2 somewhere, but nobody knows where. So leaving nothing but imposters then in their place, right? And the imposters have no power even to ordain priests. So do you see what happens? So what does this look like to a person who embraces the Siri theory? Well, let me give you an example. I entered for the Chartres pilgrimage 20 years ago. I walk into the city of Chartres. I'm walking with a friend, a high-profile Catholic activist who had recently been convinced of the Siri theory, unbeknownst to me. And all of a sudden he says to me, we arrive at the cathedral in Chartres, and he says, let's grab a beer and a steak over at the Serpent next to the cathedral. I'm like, before Mass? He says, yeah. I say, you kidding me? Why would we do that? And then he points to the Chartres Cathedral, filled with thousands of people and hundreds of Ecclesia Dei priests of the Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, right? The other traditional orders. And he says, tragically, my friends, he says, because there isn't a single validly ordained priest in that building. What's more, anyone who attends that Latin Mass is guilty of material idolatry, worshiping a wafer. It's not consecrated. Now, I say this as a guy he was my friend of mine, and it was heartbreaking. That's where he ended up. That's where the Siri theory took him in the end, sort of the ultimate home aloner. There are no priests left. So think about that. If you're going to a fraternity Mass right now, or a Society of St. Pius X Mass, diocesan traditional Latin Mass, they're not priests anymore. They're not. It's not possible. So this is why, friends, I reacted as I did to the Mel Gibson-Rogan interview. Not because I have some personal vendetta against Mel Gibson, not in the least, right? I have decades of experience with this theory and where it ends, and I'm just not interested. I will never do that to you. I will never lead anybody in that direction because it's a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac of despair as far as I'm concerned. So I knew exactly what Gibson was getting at, and I think in a way, Mel Gibson is so broken right now, in a way, and I'm not going to get into his marital issues and all of that, but it's like, once you break out of the church, you kind of go at your own thing. Lots of bad things happen to people, You really, and it's not the case if you have a good priest. If you're in the Fraternity of St. Peter, the Society of St. Pius X, and you have spiritual leaders, like Bishop Schneider said, find a good bishop, even if it's an SSPX bishop. Stay in the church, right? So Mel Gibson knew what he was getting at. He's a public figure. Even if Rogan and most of his audience had no idea, no clue what Gibson was getting at, we all knew. We knew what he was getting at. It was important for me to say something, and that's why I spoke up, right? Because I just can't sit back and let anyone trot out a theory that holds that every priest in the Society of St. Pius X is not a priest. That every priest in the Fraternity of St. Peter is Mr. So-and-so, right? Invalidly ordained. That Bishop Schneider is Mr. Schneider. That Cardinal Burke is Mr. Burke. I can't get behind that, friends. I just can't. And so apart from a few chapels here and there, the gates of hell really have prevailed against the church. I happen to know that even at Gibson's chapel, some priests who reach a level of despair will go there and have themselves conditionally ordained because they're so terrified that they're not even priests anymore, While God's playing hide the Pope with people, hide the Pope with us for 70, 80 years now. You don't have to, I'm not debating you. I'm just telling you, this is where I come down. This is where I've always been. It's where I always will be. It's not the same as saying, well, Francis now has become a formal absolute heretic. He's no longer the Pope. This is something people are looking at, right? Even Archbishop Vigano is looking at that. But that's not the same as saying, we haven't had a Pope since 1958. You really run into problems if you go that far back with this. You don't have any cardinals, bishops, or priests anymore. And by the way, people say, well, Vigano believes that. Well, if he does, they say Vigano went and got himself conditionally reconsecrated a bishop. Well, if that's the case, I would entreat my old and dear friend, Archbishop Vigano, to come clean with that. Because so far, it has not been confirmed. And I guess I'd like to know why. If the situation is such that a man like Cardinal Archbishop Vigano needs to have himself conditionally reconsecrated a bishop, why is he not telling us about that? Why is that a secret? You see? I'm not sure where this all leads, but it's no place good as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing is, friends, there is a traditional Catholic counter-revolution that is just so powerful and so of God and getting larger and more powerful every single day. I'm not going to tell you who's offering the traditional Latin Mass at Chartres this year, the Chartres pilgrimage. But when you hear it, you're just going to be filled with hope and gratitude to God and ready to fight. And that's what we need more than anything else. There is a traditional Catholic counter-revolution going on worldwide that is so powerful right now that the uber-modernist Pope himself, Francis, is positively obsessed with crushing it. Why? Why isn't he obsessed with crushing sedevacantism? Because he doesn't care about sedevacantism. He cares about resistance inside the church, because that's where every one of us belongs. Inside the church, fighting for every single square inch of Catholic ground, never surrendering, never giving up, never giving Francis a peaceful moment. We're not going away. We're having children, large families, counter-revolutionary movements. So there is a war to fight, friends. There's every reason to hope for the victory in that war as well, because it's God's victory and he's already won. We just need to hang on through this chastisement. And for me, and I'll close on this, it's real simple. I will never tell anyone in this audience that as far as I'm concerned, you don't need to go to the Latin Mass on Sunday because Father so-and-so is really Mr. So-and-so. That's how I see it. I would never do that. I would never advise any one of you to stay away from the sacraments indefinitely, maybe for the rest of your lives, based on my personal interpretation of the flaws in the new rites of ordination and the new rite, the new liturgy, the new Mass. I would never do this to anyone who looks to me for any kind of leadership. That would be a gross scandal to do that. Who am I to tell you to stop going to Mass? I just don't believe that God has abandoned us, abandoned his church to that extent. Yes, we're going through a chastisement where Rome will lose the faith, says Our Lady of La Salette, and could become the seat of the Antichrist. We need to brace for that. We need to fight against that. We need to pray. We need to keep the faith. But I believe Francis is part of that chastisement, part of God's chastisement, because we've broke the covenant, because the church has broke the covenant. So we need to get back in the good graces of God. We resist the revolutionaries, resist Francis, Team Francis to their faces, hold fast to tradition, and then, yes, support all the good and holy young priests that Francis is condemning right now as mentally disturbed, stand with them, support them. These are the men that God has seen in his mercy has provided for us and our children. The young vocations to the fraternity and the Institute and Society of St. Pius X, hundreds of them, thousands of them, stand with them because there's the future of this counter-revolution. There's how we see the other side. There's how we live to see the undoing of the revolution. That's how I see it, friends. I don't need to debate this with you, and I won't. We were debating this 40 years ago. It's a vicious cul-de-sac, circular firing squad of ugliness. I want nothing to do with it. And that's my final word on Sedevacantist. I've never blamed the Sedevacantist for that desperate position they've come to. I blame the revolution, but I can't be a part of it either, you know? And if you disagree with me on this, fine. Who am I to judge? I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. I wish you all the best. And I would say to Mr. Gibson, ironically enough, since it was his movie from which we stole the Unite the Clans, I would say to him, unite the clans, Mel. Unite the clans, think about it, pray about it. Stop with this theory that leads to nowhere but despair. Join us. We need your help, man. We need your help to drive them out. For God's sake, help us. Let's make the church Catholic again.